Thank you to everyone who has joined us for tonight's webinar. We're going to go ahead and get started here. So we'll start with introductions. I'm Anna Heck. I'm an extension educator here. Megan, do you want to go next?
I'm Megan Milbrecht. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Entomology, and I do half research, half extension, working mainly with honeybee diseases.
And Zach?
I'm Zachary Huang. I'm an associate professor in entomology. I study stresses on honeybees.
Dan?
Dan Wines. I'm the farm manager at the Pollinator Center. So I look after our campus bees.
All right, and then Remy.
Hi, good evening. I'm Remington Rice. I study stress in humans and lead the Managing Farm Stress project here for MSU Extension.
So Remy is our guest presenter tonight to tell us about another MSU resource. All right, so I'll go ahead and get us started here. So it's an MSU program, and we are going to start with announcements. Then Remy is going to talk about managing farm stress. Zach is going to talk about plants in bloom. Megan will speak on late season nucs. Dan is covering pulling honey. We'll all talk about managing and monitoring varroa mites, and then we'll open it up for some Q&A. So to get us started, if you're looking for links to tonight's webinar, they are in the chat. So here's a QR code so you can pull up all of the links that we are mentioning in tonight's webinar. And then we'll also put that link in the chat there. All right. So a few kind of just announcements in case you're interested. We have a couple of news articles that we put out that highlight some ways to learn more about honeybee research that's going on. So there was a special collection of scientific articles on honeybee research that was published in the Journal of Insect Science, and those are all open source, so everyone can read them. And if you want to read some newer research papers, you can go ahead and find them in the special collection. And then there's also recently published by Beekeeping is the American Bee Research Conference proceedings. So this is kind of a summary of the different topics that were presented on at the most recent American Bee Research Conference. All right, our team just came out with an impact report. So this kind of highlights what MSU does to work with beekeepers and to support pollinators. We emphasize three main areas. So one is specifically working with beekeepers to support honeybee health. One is supporting pollinator stewardship, so protecting bees from pesticides and encouraging more bee forage on the landscape. And then the third is working with veterinary practitioners so that they can better help and support beekeepers. So if you're interested in our work, you can find our impact report. And then we list a lot of our resources on this page, getting started with beekeeping in Michigan. So if you're new to beekeeping or if you're new to finding beekeeping resources, this is a good page to start at. And we also really highlight the local beekeeping clubs and associations on this page and how to get connected with them. All right, you'll find our upcoming events on our website, pollinators.msu.edu, on the events tab. We have a lot of workshops and webinars still coming up that you'll be able to find on the events page. And our monthly office hours are scheduled out for the rest of the year. So if you're registered for tonight's webinar, you're registered for our series of monthly webinars. All right, and we're posting tonight's webinar and past office hour webinars on our YouTube channel. So you'll find the recording at the Michigan State University Beekeeping YouTube channel. And if you're not already signed up for our newsletter, you can sign up by going to Stay Connected on our website and then selecting the Pollinators and Pollination News Digest. All right, if you are in Michigan and you have a beekeeping question that you don't get a chance to ask tonight or that comes up for you before our next office hour webinars, the best way to ask it is through our Ask Extension form. So that you'll find on our website. If you go to questions, there's a form, you put in your question, you attach photos, and then that's how we will respond to your beekeeping question. All right, and then because it is Pollinator Week, we are also doing a crowd power campaign. So this is an MSU crowdfunding campaign where people are invited to donate to support our work. And it really does help us to have donations so that we can do lots of different kinds of things to support bees, beekeepers, and pollinators. So you'll find the support fund at this page with the QR code. So the next part is with Remy on managing farm stress. And just a reminder that we are highlighting some different MSU resources and programs in our webinar. You'll see that this month is managing farm stress. Next month, we'll be talking about a program called Agribility, which is about accessibility in agriculture. And then in August, we'll have a guest from the MSU Product Center. So they're a great place to work with if you're trying to sell and market your honey. So I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to Remington.
Thank you. Yes, I am Remington Rice. I lead the Managing Farm Stress project for MSU Extension. And we offer, different resources that I'll describe in a minute to farmers across the state of Michigan and farm families, farm workers. And we do this because, well, I don't know if you know this, but farming can be really stressful. And so we try to help on the stress management side of things. The first kind of step in managing our stress is becoming aware of our signs of stress. When I start to get stressed, deadlines, grants are coming up, my left eye will actually start to twitch. And so I want to just take a moment and ask the audience and panel, what are your signs of stress? How do you know that you're feeling stressed? And you can just put that in the chat. Any participant that's brave enough to mention, see if you come up with something I haven't seen before, maybe. But yeah, that's really the first step in managing our stress, is becoming aware.
Yeah, and we do have the chat turned off for participants, but you can definitely put something in the Q&A so we can see it.
Yeah, so losing sleep, that's definitely one. It could be sleeping too much or not sleeping at all. Maybe the ruminating thoughts late at night, keeping you up. Yeah, sore jaw. So holding tension in your jaw, maybe that's a very common thing. Having this physical manifestation of the stress. Shoulders is another one I hear about. Yeah,
I see
so
anxious in a chat that just
anxious.
came in.
Yeah, so feeling nausea, anxiety, definitely signs, this psychological effect of anxiety happening, and then the nausea too, this, gastrointestinal sign that's showing your sign of stress. And I bring this up because, you, the listener, you're the expert on your own signs of stress. And you're also the expert on how you respond to that. So so eating junk food, so that is a coping strategy. Over talking, over busy. Yeah, oftentimes with farmers I work with, I'm stressed. I'm just going to double down and work even harder to try to get through this. And sometimes that works. Sometimes you burn out, and then you end up, having a bigger issue than if you address the stress initially. But you are really the expert when it comes to these signs of stress. Another way to think about this is, how would someone you're close with know that you're stressed? So how would a partner, see that you're stressed? For example, if my partner comes down in the morning and I'm eating a large pepperoni pizza for breakfast, that could be a sign that I'm having stress. And so with this, and I bring this up because we teach, and I'll get into our offerings here and then let you all get back to chatting about bees. But we have workshops and trainings for farmers, farm workers, farm families on how to identify these signs, and then what options you have to manage that stress. And I know that I can't be prescriptive because the coping strategy for you is going to be unique and you're going to know best. And so it's really a workshop to bring out, what are your own strategies? How can you implement those into your life? I'm not there just nagging on you, telling you you have to go run a marathon every day. That wouldn't be realistic. So we also have another workshop on communicating with farmers under stress, and that's aimed more at like veterinarians or nutrient suppliers, but really anyone that wants to better their communication. So, if you have a spouse that you're seeing is exhibiting some of these signs of stress, the way that you talk with them about that can impact whether or not they seek help, whether or not they're able to manage that stress more effectively. And so we have a communication skills training too. And that also goes into like warning signs of suicide and like how do you talk to someone that may be having suicidal thoughts. So I'll let Anna reshare the slide and you'll see a QR code in our website that you could follow and learn more about. We also, the last thing I'll mention is that we have grant funds currently to support this teletherapy. So we've partnered with a couple different client providers here in the state of Michigan. We selected counselors and therapists that have an agricultural background. And if you don't have health insurance or you're concerned that the insurance won't pay, we can actually use our grant funds to pay for that treatment. And so we've had a lot of farmers go through that. One individual I was working with went through the counseling, a couple months go by, he reaches back out and he shares that the counseling likely, it saved his business and likely saved his life. And so these tools, I just want to let everyone know that they're available for you. And if you or you think someone you know may benefit from them, you can just email me directly at the email there. If you search my name or MSU Farm Stress, you'll find us. Easy to find. And yeah, last thing I'll say is stress is a universal, part of being a human. And we all experience stress. And you're not alone. Oftentimes, especially in agriculture, it can feel really isolating. But you're not alone in this, and there's people out there that are willing to, talk with you and help. And so, reaching out for help is a really brave and important step in taking care of yourself. So with that, I'll hand it back.
Thanks so much, Remington. All right, switching gears now. Zach is going to talk about plants in bloom.
Hi. Yeah, so we are at this point that most of the late spring flowers are gone. The bad news is we missed the black locust. By missing them, I didn't mean the timing. I mean, if they were blooming, we'd be also done. But I checked like 10 different trees this year and found like 2 flowers. So for some reason, I decided not to bloom this year. Last year, I know we got some crop. The first extraction tasted like black locust because it has a vanilla flavor, and then the second one, for me, it tasted more like basswood. It has a minty aftertaste. So that's how I tell the 2 apart. So hopefully this year we'll get some basswood bloom, which are blooming now. So this is from my website, bees.msu.edu/flowers, that I write a blog about different plants with pretty photos of bees on them, which you will see some today. So I'm gonna go. Do I have control of the slides? Okay. So right now the small leaf linden, Tilia cordata, is blooming now, which I need to go check because originally I thought those were Tilia americana. Georgia has told me so. So maybe I need to double check. And then MSU campus has another one, tomentosa, which has silverish underside of the leaves. So it's kind of hairy. But they bloom probably 2 or 3 weeks after the first one. Next slide. And if you're in Michigan, white Dutch clover on the left is probably your main plant for producing honey. I was estimating maybe 50% of our honey, after subtracting all the major ones, after subtracting black locust and basswood, the 50% of the other honey production probably come from this plant. So which it blooms all summer long. It's taken over my lawn. So and I wait until they become black. So almost seeding, then a mold, then no bloom again. So it's a very nice resource for bees, for honeybees, bumblebees, and a lot of other bees. The right side one is outside clover, which I thought was not very common. I only found them loaded with honeybees about 2 weeks ago when I tried to pick up strawberries. And bees do love them. But the main difference is this one spreads by crawling. It has horizontal rhizomes, and the flowers are more pinkish, but it can have white flowers, so it should be hard to distinguish. But the better way is to see how it's moving, how it's spreading. This one spreads by the rhizome, so it's actually roots. So it looks like stems going horizontally, but it's actually roots going and spreading. Next one. And 2 weeks ago, I saw those was just started blooming, but now I see more on the roadside. So on the left side is white sweet clover, on the right side is yellow sweet clover. I think the white ones might be more common, and they are biennial. They bloom every other year. We used to, an old bee building, I think Roger Hupangala planted some. On a good year, they grow taller than my car. Can walk in there, and so many flowers, and it'll be buzzing with bees. So it's a good resource, but I think some states consider them invasive and also quote not native, so they're trying to get rid of them. But they are very good resources for bees. Red clover, which is often planted as a cover crop for nitrogen fixation, beautiful flower, and again I saw them intercropped with alfalfa probably 3 or 4 years ago, and spent half a day taking photos. That's some nice photos. But usually beekeepers say they're a little bit too long, the corolla, so that the honeybees have trouble getting the nectar. But I do see some variety differences, like the ones near my house has much bigger flower heads and also deeper, so the honeybees will have trouble. So those bumblebees will be do better, but will do better. But other beekeepers swear they make a crop on red clover, even in Michigan. So bees can get some honey. Another very common weed here, huge patches by roadside, and it'll be blooming right now, probably for another month or two. It's corn wedge. On my website, I have some kind of index for the importance of bees, which is a combination of whether bees like it or not and whether it has nectar resources. So I think this one I rated 2 or 3 just because I see more bumblebees than honeybees. So just in case you get tired of honeybee photo, this one has a leaf cutter bee. But usually you see a bee, a small bee with the bud raised. That's very characteristic of a leaf cutter bee raising. Other bees don't do that with the bud going up in there. Yeah, next one. And Stockholm sumac, think it's just started now. Bees also love it, has both nectar and pollen, as you can see in this photo, pollen on the leg, and I can see whether they have pollen or nectar, you need to do observation. If bees are licking every flower, then there'll be nectar. But if they're licking nothing on their legs, you observe 10 bees, nobody has pollen, and most likely it doesn't have, bees don't collect that pollen. So this one, they do both. And incidentally, a lot of beekeepers use the seed pods of this plant as a good smoker fuel. And you have to wait until probably September, October for the seed pods to be harvestable and then dry them. Privet, this one really depends on the variety. It's planted as a hedgerow somewhere. I know I saw some in Okemos near the Rite Aid. That bloomed like 3 weeks ago. So other ones, I think I just started. The bees also love them, but it's supposed to produce a very dark honey and maybe not so pleasant, like goldenrod-ish grade. But bees do love them because they have a lot of nectar, and it's blooming now. Japanese lilac is almost done. This is like a tree about 8 to 10 feet tall. It's see lots of them in MSU horticulture garden. Has blooming for probably 3 weeks now. It's near the end, but you see a lot of honeybees and bumblebees on them. Let's see if there's another flower I have. I just saw elderberry flowers in my backyard that's blooming, and honeybees will go for that too. They have nectar, maybe also pollen. Birdsfoot trefoil. This is a very common weed in Michigan. Now it's blooming. It will bloom all summer, probably for a good 2 or 3 months, right before the frost come or when it's too dry, that they die off. But they all keep coming in batches. This one is done, next one starts. Usually places you couldn't mow them, they hide. They will become a big patch. It's a good, it's a legume also, good nectar plant for bees. Common milkweed. So this one just started blooming. Again, they bloom different times. Once in front of my house, have not bloomed yet, but I saw some in Japanese garden yesterday at the MSU, and I see a lot of bees get stuck. So they have what's this called the Pollinator. That's really tight for the bees to get out. Bees will, that leg will just get stuck into those. That's actually the plant's mechanism for pollination. The pollinator would have to insert that one to the next flower. So it's kind of a difficult task. And then the bee sometimes has trouble pulling it off and they will die. And you see bees stuck there. Other bees take pictures of this funny structure on the bee leg and send me pictures saying, Zach, what is those strange things attached to bees? I tell them those are milkweed pollinaria. And it's difficult for bees to pull it out, but most bees manage it too. I would say maybe 8 to 10% of bees die because having trouble dislodging it, and it will become dried on flowers. Bumblebees are usually stronger, they're bigger. So that's all I only mentioned. These are the major ones. Of course, you have tons of mints, a lot of different salvia, bees love them, horticultural types. So because I could spend 2 hours if I cover every flower. So I don't want to do that. Thank you.
That was great. Thanks, Zach. Great. Next, Megan's going to talk about late season nukes.
I do think I could spend 2 hours looking at Zachary's photos of bees on flowers, though. So one of the things we like about this is giving you a little heads up of what to kind of do over the next month. So one of the things that I like to do is start to make nukes sometime in July. The timing, I'm not going to give you an exact date, but the timing that I look for is kind of when the bulk of my honey flow is done, but I still have a trickle. So it's not fun to make up nukes in a really heavy dearth. So if you've got a really strong dearth, I wouldn't, it'd be really tough to do. And then sometimes you don't want to be so disruptive when your main honey flow is on. So figure out when your blooms are. Where I am in Jackson County, I don't have a ton of basswood in my yards, but it would usually stop blooming around the 4th of July. So kind of planning for me after that. And then I stopped making them. The way I was trained was when the cicadas start singing, which is usually end of August. So like mid-July to mid-August is kind of the peak season when I make them up in my part of the state. And the reason for doing that is so that I have my splits for the next year. So if I do lose any colonies, I've got my replacements right there. So this is a huge part of me being more sustainable and not purchasing bees every single year, is that I make up nukes in the fall. That's my main reason. There's other reasons though too, which I'll talk about on the next slide, because there's a couple ways that you can do it. So one option is that you just make a nuke from each hive, and I think these are all animated. So here you can see there's two ways you can do this. So one way is, let's say you bought 3 packages this year and you just got queens from wherever. You can make a nuke with that old queen, basically put her into retirement. So you don't have to pinch her if you don't want to, because I'm also a softie and struggle doing that. And then you can either allow your bees to requeen if you pretty much liked the genetics, or you can drop a queen cell in with superior genetics, or you can try to use a mated queen as well. But if you use a queen cell or allow them to requeen, you're also breaking the brood cycle. Now, whether or not this is appropriate for you will determine on when your honey flows are. So maybe you don't want to break your brood cycle depending where your major honey flow is. But what happens is that you have a young queen in your main honey producing colony for next year. So that's going to give that colony a really big advantage. If, let's say, that queen goes out, tries to get mated, gets eaten by a dragonfly, doesn't come back, you can just do a newspaper combine and put that old queen right back in there. So you have that queen as a backup. If you have 3 colonies, you basically double your chances of getting 3 colonies through wintertime, or you increase the odds that you'll have the number of colonies. If you don't need them in the spring, you can make your decision then. So that's one option. The other option is that you break down your weaker colonies. So let's say these 2 colonies on the outside are making a lot of honey, they're in full production, and that one in the middle just, it swarmed 3 times, it just isn't doing something right. So I'm not going to break it down if it's sick. If it's smaller because it's sick, I'm dealing with it in other ways. But what I can do is say, okay, the colony on the left and the right are still making honey. I don't want to disrupt them, but this little one in the middle is being a freeloading pet, and I don't have time for more pets. So I'm going to break that down. So I think if you click, there's another image for it. And so you can often get like 3 or 4 nukes out of a single colony. At this time of year, it's often, or when you get into July, I can usually tell which of my colonies are still going to be making honey. I've started to do this quite a bit because also, your big colonies are going to be the ones that are going to bring in goldenrod if it's available. And so once you break them down into nukes, you don't really count on them making you any more honey. So this is another option. And a lot of times, if it's a smaller colony, I don't necessarily want those genetics. So again, I'm going to take queen cells that I like and replace and make nukes with it and make 3 hives. So again, I'm going into winter, I'm increasing my odds of having the number of colonies I want coming out of winter, or if you want to expand, it allows you to expand from within your operation. And it allows you to, not disrupt the ones that are doing for honey production. And then the last slide I have talking about overwintered nukes is I did do a SARE grant. I'll try to look up the report and put it in the chat. But the short answer is that the type of equipment doesn't make a really big difference. So I looked at using like the double deeps, the Michael Palmer style. I looked at the polystyrene nukes like Joe Latcha did. I did single deeps. And really, they all just had kind of different usability for me, but none of them really made a big difference in survival. Worst case scenario, in my worst year, I usually get even 50% of the nukes through. I think the first year of this, I think 80% of the nukes came through. And so, if you're thinking about it in a numbers game, even if 50% come through, and those are all of your spares, that's really nice. And I would say the one that I didn't talk about, so for the very first example where you take 1 nuke from each colony, you could take the original queen. If you really don't want to be disruptive, you can take a small nuke from each colony and drop a queen cell in there and leave the original queen as well. So there's lots of ways to do it, but kind of any time after the solstice is when people get started. It's a really nice time to make your expansions because there's more local genetics or local queens available, and you just kind of can watch them through the winter.
Thanks, Megan. Next, Dan's going to talk about pulling honey.
Yeah, so hopefully your bees have done well through the spring, and we're getting to that time of year when there may be surplus honey to harvest. And when we think about harvesting honey and how our colonies are configured, at least kind of we use this photo a lot, this slide, remembering that like we have kind of our colony where our animal lives year round. That's our brood nest, kind of down below in whatever configuration. In this colony, that's 2 deeps, but you might run 3 mediums or a single deep. You know, there's lots of different ways, but kind of have that brood nest. And then the boxes you stack on top through the season, those are what you're anticipating harvesting as surplus to the bees' requirements. So we harvest the supers, hopefully, if things go well. And how do we know when to harvest? Certainly when they start getting heavy, but it's important that the bees get a chance to cap that honey. And the reason for that is they generally won't cap honey that is too high in moisture. When they're putting a capping on it, they're saying this is dry enough. We're intending this to be long-term food storage for us. So 18% moisture is kind of the rule of thumb, where below that, honey's not going to ferment. And the reason why you don't want to harvest a lot of uncapped honey, you better, if it still has a lot of open cells, the potential that you end up with honey that has high moisture in it and possibly is going to ferment is much greater. When honey's in the comb like this on this next slide, it's got a lot larger surface area. So giving the bees another week or 2 to dry that out is going to be much easier than you extracting it prematurely, figuring out my moisture is a couple points too high, and trying to figure out some dehumidifier situation with a very low surface area to evaporate a little bit of water out of. So kind of the bees will basically tell you when it's ready by capping it over. So when it comes to getting, you need to separate the bees from the supers and the frames with honey. There's several options to do that, and there's kind of just pros and cons, depending on your scale that you operate at. So you certainly don't have to take a whole box of honey at a time. If you've just got 1 or 2 colonies and they're close by, you can take a couple frames here and there. And a real easy way to get the bees off those, oftentimes it's nice to have like an empty box or something to work into, and you could just simply just kind of flick the bees off with a bee brush or a handful of long grass, and just kind of using a gently rolling a gentle flicking motion, so you're not really rolling and upsetting the bees, but you can kind of brush them right back onto the hive. And then if you have an empty box, that you can place those combs to take them into your kitchen, your garage, or wherever you're going to extract them. So simple, cheap, and easy. If you're doing a small amount, just really literally brushing the bees off and clearing the combs that way. Another option is called an escape board or a bee escape. And what this is it's beekeepers are pretty creative, and somewhere, I don't know who gets credit, but kind of invented a bee escape. And what that is it's essentially like a one-way door for the bees to go through. It's kind of like a fish trap works, where it's really easy to get into, and from one direction they get funneled that way, and from the other it's hard to find that entrance. So what we're looking at here in this picture is on the left photo, which is the hole visible, is the top, that's the upward facing side of it, and then the right is kind of this triangular pattern and in that triangle is hardware cloth underneath it. And how it functions is you put this board underneath the supers that you want to take, and it's really easy, that big, like it's a 2-inch hole there. It's really easy for the bees to find that just in their normal traffic of bees moving up and down in the hive. coming downwards, that's easy for them to find. They go through the hole, end up on the bottom, and then that triangular, the way that's angled, you see at each point of the triangle is very narrow ways for the bees to go out. So they kind of get steered towards those exits. And then it's hard for them. They don't really find those narrow points of the triangle to come back in. So it ends up being kind of a one-way bee traffic where bees go down, they don't come back up. So to use this, you put it in the colony under any supers that you want to take. So this, you don't have the option of taking just a few frames. You're taking a box at a time. And you put it in. I think the next photo has it. Literally, it just sits in the colony underneath whatever supers you want to take. So in this case, the escape board's painted white, but we've got two supers on top of it. Those are the ones intending to take. And then there's another super below that's not quite ready yet. And then we're down to the brood nest below that. But inserting that bee escape in, typically I work in you can get away with 24 hours if you come back. These will be very clear of bees generally. Up to 2 days is also fine. I tend to think in 1 to 2 days. If you start to get 3 days and beyond, you can find some higher number of bees finding their way back up into those supers. Also, the possibility of like pests getting in there, things like hive beetles and that, which could, because those combs in the supers become sort of undefended space once they don't have bees patrolling them. So I kind of think 1 to 2 days is ideal for these. Really nice option. So downside is it takes 2 trips to the bee yard. You've got to go just make your harvesting decisions and put them in, and then you've got to go back. So if your bee yard's an hour away, maybe not the best option. But if your bee yard is, your backyard, that's really easy. There's not an inconvenience of 2 trips. So that is one situation where the bee escapes are really nice. I will say it is important that any space above that bee escape needs to be bee tight. So if you have like an upper entrance, a lot of times people have, the inner cover that you can flip over with a notch in it. You don't want bees to be able to have access from the top, because essentially you're clearing out all the bees that live in that colony and defend that honey, and then it's going to get robbed out. So if you have, boxes with rotten corners, using duct tape or sponge or something to seal that off, and making sure your inner cover or whatever your lid is fits snugly. And if you have, some people like to use auger holes or things like that in boxes, you want to plug that up and make that bee tighter. You're going to come back to robbed out boxes. But they do clear very well. And you'll come back, there'll be 1 or 2 bees wandering around, but it's as good as you would do if you were brushing bees or any of these other methods I'll mention. There's always going to be 1 or 2 bees left, but they get very clean. Another nice aspect is because when you went out that first day and split the boxes apart, if there's any honey in the combs on the top and bottom bars, generally that gets cleaned up by the bees in that day or 2 before you return, but they don't all vacate immediately. So you've got a little time, and those bees are cleaning up that honey, that cells that you've opened up by splitting boxes apart. So that means when you're carrying, whether you're putting it, in your truck or carrying it into your garage, you don't have a bunch of honey trailing. Your top and bottom bars are quite dry, which is also nice if in the honey house. If you scrape your top and bottom bars just to kind of keep things clean, you're dealing with almost exclusively wax. There's very little honey in it, and you're not leaving honey trails wherever you carry that box or dripping on your boots or your pants. So another option beekeepers use is called a fume board. And what this is it's essentially it's like a rim spacer. Typically the ones I see are about 2 inches deep. And it's got kind of a rigid on one side, on the top side that's flush, and this is kind of a black coroplast on the right. And then if you look at the underside, on the left side of this photo, it's got like a felt type material, like an absorbent fabric. And what you use, there's several different chemicals available you can get from all the major bee supply companies, and usually they have names of some indication of getting the bees out of here, Bee Go and Honey Robber and Bee Bandit and those sort of things. But you spray a little bit of this chemical, and what it is that there's different ones that have different active ingredients, but they smell strong. You put that on top of, you spray the fabric, you put it on top of the hive so the fabric side is down, and the bees don't like that, and they go down. It just kind of it drives the bees down lower into the box, or into the box below where you want to take. These work best on warm, sunny days. They don't really work when it's overcast. They don't work particularly well. Like these aren't really a great option for me when I'm if I'm harvesting goldenrod in the fall, because that's quite late and we just don't have those real hot days. But this is a great for this time of year and into the summer, the July, August harvest. A warm, sunny day, the fume boards work really well. I think there's a picture of what one would look like on the hive in the next slide. Yeah, so here you see it's just inverted set on the hive. If you were going to take multiple supers off a hive, you would use one at a time. You would take, you would take one super, you would put the board on top, you would take that one super once the bees vacated. Typically that takes 2 or 3 minutes. And then if you wanted to take the next super below that, after you took the top one off, you would reapply the board, give it another couple of minutes, and again, drive the bees down out of that next box. So they do work well. Several beekeepers, if you've got a handful of colonies in a yard, you can kind of have 2 fume boards and just start rotating them through. By the time it's cleared one, you're on to the next and just kind of cycle them through. I've seen that work pretty efficiently. So you don't need one for every colony. Having a couple of them, you can kind of work at your own pace. And then the other option that I see commonly used to get bees out of supers is blowing them. So just like I find a small shop blower to be pretty handy, especially with some of the battery powered units available now, with cords and things like that. And typically to do this, I'll just invert a box, flip it up on end like that. You see, you don't want to set it on its side because all the frames kind of tend to flop together. But if you set it up on end, and then you're just blowing, directing that blower between the seams, you can kind of see daylight between those frames. Also having a hive tool to kind of loosen up some frames. And typically I'll do that and just blow the bees on the ground right in front of the hive. I do kind of try to pay attention to those bees will crawl back in the entrances, but I try to be a little strategic if I'm going to harvest a yard with a blower of where I'm going to be walking and my path between hives and my truck that I'm going to be loading on, so I don't blow a bunch of bees on the ground right where then I'm going to need to walk to carry things. So that's something to think about. But yeah, over 5-10 minutes, the bees will kind of all crawl back into the hive. So in the moment, it looks a little disruptive, but they sort it out and get back home pretty quickly. So also, this is kind of cropped pretty close, but this is a larger backpack blower that the beekeeper's using, and you can see they've taped on a specialty vacuum nozzle, so it's very narrow, so they're getting a narrow stream of energy stream of airflow through between the frames like that in those vertical slots. So, and again, just moving stuff around with a hive tool to clear up a little space and get good air movement through there. So that's one that also works pretty well. Those are kind of the ways that I see beekeepers getting their honey off colonies.
Great. And what were you doing today at work, Dan?
At work, so I had done this process on Thursday, Friday. So I was actually extracting the honey that I pulled at the end of last week. So that's a whole different deal, extraction. But yeah, we spun honey in the extraction room today from our early season. Most of that nectar came in end of April and early May. Some dandelion and some autumn olive, and then things kind of primarily autumn olive, I would guess, and then things kind of shut down the latter part of May, and they're picking up again now. But I wanted to get that early season crop off before we get this mid-season stuff coming.
Great. All right. So next I'm going to talk a little bit about varroa. So our monthly reminder is to make sure that you are thinking about varroa. We get a lot of questions and calls in the fall, winter, and spring from beekeepers who lose their colonies because of what was likely varroa mites and the viruses associated with mites. And normally what we wish we could do is go back in time to spring and summer to start better monitoring and managing mites. So this is the right time of year to be preparing, keeping mite levels low. So we're keeping virus levels low, hopefully, as we keep the mites low, and trying to do that throughout the season through the fall when we expect our winter bees to develop. There are resources on our website Again, the Tools for Varroa Management guide from Honeybee Health Coalition goes through your different treatment options. For monitoring, we're normally going to recommend the alcohol wash. So that's using isopropyl or rubbing alcohol. And we have lots of instructions and videos on our website where you can find how to do a test to collect a sample of about 300 bees, see how many varroa mites are in that sample, count the bees to make sure that you actually got close to 300 bees, and know what your mite levels are before and after treatments. A big thing to think about this week, though, is if you were planning on using formic acid to treat colonies, which is a treatment we normally really like this time of year because it can kill some mites underneath the capped brood, and then also it's approved for use with honey supers on. But if you are in our area where it is very hot this week, this is not going to be a good time to treat with formic acid. So the label says outside daytime highs should be between 50 and 85 degrees Fahrenheit on day of application. Hot temperatures, so greater than or equal to 92 degrees Fahrenheit during the first 3 days, may lead to excessive bee, brood, and queen loss. So thinking about that warning, and if you are going to use formic acid, waiting until you have the right treatment window. Other treatment options that are allowed for use with honey supers on are Hopguard 3 and oxalic acid. But our team normally waits to use oxalic acid until the late fall or early winter as a solution or dribble method when we don't expect brood in the colony, because the oxalic acid treatment is really good at killing the varroa mites on adult bees, but doesn't kill the mites underneath the cappings. All right, after you close the webinar, you'll see the program evaluation survey for tonight's webinar. If you want to share your feedback with us, you should also get it in an email tomorrow. As a follow-up email from Zoom. Again, the resources we mentioned tonight are compiled on this webpage, on this video page. And here's our acknowledgements. And we did actually get I got an email today with a question, so I thought maybe we could start with that for answering questions time. That didn't give our team a heads up, so I'll read it to you all, and then you can go for it. So the question says, I have a hive with lots of bees, too much honey and bee bread, and no brood, but it smells bad. I wanted to test it for foul brood, but couldn't find brood to test. It also has some crawlers in the grass. This is also the hive that had chalk brood 2 years in a row. At the very least, I want to requeen, but I don't want to work the hive if it is diseased. Is the only way to know is to send a is the only way to know to send a sample to the USDA Beltsville lab. Who wants to start with that one?
What did you respond?
Oh, I just put it in the slide.
Oh man.
That's very unusual with no brood. And the smells bad. So what could it be? It can be American fall brood if there's no brood.
Well, that
It's
would be
not
that would absolutely be my first follow-up, is when they said they couldn't find a brood to test. I would be not really concerned about a brood disease if there was zero brood at all. So I would probably follow up and ask them, when they were looking for brood in the brood nest, what was in the brood nest. And then the smelling bad part is, I'm always suspicious about that, because sometimes the bad smell is the honey drying off. And I think some of you know this story, is I got a call that was really similar to this, and someone swore up and down they had foul brood, and it was actually a dead raccoon under the hive. So there's many reasons why a hive could smell bad. They didn't want to open it because they thought they had foul brood. So I would definitely ask them what they saw, and then I'm going to put a link in the chat for everyone on our diagnostics tools page, which is probably the next thing I would send them, so they could look at some of the photos of what the common disease looked like and some of the tests they could.
Yeah, I mean, fall brood smells, but doesn't smell like a dead raccoon. The worst I can smell is if I open the colony, have the flame right up to my nose, I can smell it's like dirty socks or something, that kind of level, not like a dead mice or something. So
I would also tell them to look at the bottom board. Sometimes if you get a bottom board where it's the entrance is pointing upwards, you'll get rainwater or just moisture that collects at the back of that bottom board, and then you get dead bees and pollen and this kind of soup that becomes pretty gross. So I would also just kind of look there. You might have a kind of a bubbling mess on the bottom board.
I've definitely had that one. That's a really good point. Yeah, so that one definitely needs a follow-up question. And then the point about chalkbrood, I have seen chalkbrood in colonies where it doesn't, it just happens to be there. And I have seen chalkbrood in colonies where it is kind of devastating and horrible. In most cases, it is quite mild. And so people do often choose to ignore it. I have seen it go away after people requeened, but I don't know if the requeening was the solution. However, if this person doesn't have any brood at all, the likely scenario is that something else is related to the stink, and you're also having a requeening event. So that if there's no brood at all, it's likely that the bees are in the process of requeening, and that alone might be sufficient to make the chalkbrood clear up.
Yeah, and my other question here, just because it did seem like I think we're all really curious to know, when was the last time you did, how much brood is in the hive? Is there any at all? If there's none at all, when was the last time you had brood in the hive? But then the other question I'd have is if you're seeing lots of bees and lots of honey and bee bread and pollen in the brood nest area, like Megan said, they could be requeening, but they also might at this point be queenless. So I'd be curious about giving this hive a frame of eggs from another hive, checking it a few days later and seeing if they're building queen cells, and using that as a test to see if they're queenless or if they have a new queen who just hasn't started laying yet. All right. Great. So now we can move on to more questions.
That was a good question to start with.
I know.
So Zach, oh, go ahead.
That's actually 3 questions, not just one.
So Zachary, the first question is for you, and it says, what kind of impact can we expect on plants during these periods of high temperatures? Will drought and dearths be possibility depending on the lengths of high temperatures?
That's a rare question for a climatologist, plant physiologist. I think 90 degrees might be very hot for us. I would assume as long as it's not super dry, plants are okay. I mean, we're not talking about 100. Then maybe some plant with heat stresses, some plants will be, like, depends on the plants. Like strawberries are very heat sensitive. So right now, strawberries would suffer. But I would say like sumac and other, even basswood, probably okay. Basswood is also a northern plant, but like tulip poplar, which I'm not sure, it should be still blooming, which is a more warmish plant. I would say be fine for 90 degree days for a week. Also should be okay. I've been tracking my weight gain of my plant or my bees, and I always blame it was too cold. Like 3 weeks ago was 65 during the day, and my bees are bringing nothing. At some point, I will start robbing. I mean, this time of the year, it's very unusual. So then I should check them tomorrow to see if they're getting something. I was saying maybe it's too cold for the plants and bees are not getting anything. So we'll see if it's 90-degree weather, bees are getting something more. I have some smart hives, smart scales, which weighs the hive every 15 minutes. So you could tell whether you added a super today or bees are gathering nectar 10 pounds a day. On a good honey flow, they could actually get 10 or 15 pounds per day. But so far this year, it didn't happen yet. The highest I got is about 7 pounds, 3 kilograms per day. And that's only 1 or 2 hives out of 20. So, yeah. So that's a tough question. In other words, it's plant related, and also, as I mentioned, if it's not super dry, like right now, my lawn, it wasn't even dry last 2 weeks, but it wasn't even hot last 2 weeks. Just started the over 90 degrees just started 2 or 3 days ago. But my lawn is already yellowish. It's because of lack of rain, not the high temperature. So, but it's supposed it might be storming again tonight. But the storm last night, I wasn't even expecting it. It's well not in the forecast. 2 days ago, it only showed up yesterday, and my wife and I didn't check. Started watering my garden, and it was like pouring at 3 a.m. So
I think you were not the only person that got caught off guard with that storm. But yeah, that's a really good point. It depends on the different plants of how they'll be affected. And also, I like the fact that you actually just have scales set up so you can see.
yeah.
Um, Anna, we are about to set up a new hive. We have a fenced-in area and we'll soon be getting a puppy. Aw. This isn't part of the question, but please do send us pictures of your puppy. Is it necessary to isolate the hive from pets?
So it's gonna depend. If it was a little puppy, I would try to keep the puppy away from the hive. Just puppies and dogs in general tend to be curious and they like to, it's my experience, just sniff the entrance of the hive. And that is if they stick their nose in there, they might get stung in the nose and you probably don't want to have to deal with that. So I would try to keep the little puppy away from the hive. Over time, a lot of dogs do learn to stay away from hives if they've been bothered by bees or stung. But some dogs learn more quickly than others do. So our dog walks by the hive but doesn't really sniff them anymore. And then Megan, I know, do you want to tell what I think it's what Trixie does?
Right. So my dog Trixie, who's a border collie, she wags her tail all the time because she's always happy. So she tends to get stung on the butt. And so now when she hears bees buzzing, she puts her butt down and she sits with her butt tucked underneath. And that's how I can tell there's bees by, because in her mind, she's very smart, but in her mind, when bees come, they sting her on the butt. So she sits down. But they also, both of my dogs, if I put on my veil, they just go hide under the trucks. They don't even need to see me open the hives anymore. They if I wanted them to leave me alone, which I generally don't, I could just put on my veil. So they do learn, but for some dogs it's not safe for them to learn the old-fashioned way. So Dan, with this current heat wave, can you talk a little bit about venting hives? Is it necessary or a good idea?
It's not something I worry about too much. Having said that, I don't think there's anything wrong with doing it. I mean, bees, we're heat wave in Michigan because it's going to be 93 for 5 days. Bees live in 100-degree temperatures, whether they're kept or they're, kind of natural feral bees, and where they come from, they certainly come from hot places. So it's not been something, I'm not going to drive out to my bee yards and increase ventilation. But if you want to, I don't see any downside. It might help them dry honey faster in these warm temperatures. It might get a little airflow going. So I think beekeeper option.
And I will say, our hives right now, they have the full entrance open. It's not like we have full-size colonies with entrance reducers in. And they also, we're thinking about water, right? So bees are bringing water back to the hives to help cool themselves down. So most places have water. I have puddles in our yard from last night's storm, but it might depend on your area to think about if you need to put out extra water for your bees.
Just a week ago, I was going to pour I have some of the screen bottom boards which has a insert. Once you take them out, it's just a screen. So I was going to do that a week ago, but it was like 50s at night. So, but I think that today might be next few days could be good to remove those inserts so then bees have just open screen. Maybe it will help them during the day.
Yeah, you can remove them. You definitely don't have to though, because otherwise you can find yourself in this game of like trying to both predict the weather and your bees' responses, which both of those are impossible. So leaving them alone is just totally fine. All right, here's another one for Dan. I need more drawn comb as I'm a second-year beekeeper. Don't we all? I have 3 overwintered colonies that have medium supers almost full and capped, and I have 3 splits that are working on new equipment. After I harvest from the overwintered colonies, is it better to give them new equipment to build out rather than replacing the extracted frames or supers to encourage new wax production?
Yeah. So I think you're on the right track in that, like realizing the value of drawn comb, and your overwintered, presumably bigger than the nucs you started this spring. Those are your better candidates to make wax. Just larger populations, they tend to draw better than little ones. The issue is that I potentially see is we're getting to what I typically find to be the end of the window for when bees readily make wax. I think where I'm at in central, Ingham County area, they make a lot of wax in May and into June, but once we start getting to the middle of June, it's not that they can't, but they're not as inclined to do it. So I would say you can put on, and by new equipment, I assume you mean foundation onto those after you harvest some honey. But I think what you want to pay attention to is that give them a week, and if there's a nectar flow and they're not touching that foundation, what potentially is a problem is they're going to start getting honey bound. Where if they're not going to build out new combs and you haven't given them drawn comb, they're going to start getting honey bound and their brood nest is going to get really choked. So if you're going to put foundation on, also, I don't know if you use queen excluders or not, but I would definitely not just put a box of foundation above an excluder. They're very low probability that they'll get into that. You can mix, to kind of hedge your bets, you can mix some foundation into some of that drawn comb, kind of give them a few of each. And if it is a big, strong growing colony, there's a good flow on, there's a good chance they may draw a couple frames, but I would, in late June, I would hesitate to put a full box of foundation on.
Yes. All right. Anna, last year I treated with Formic Pro in July, even though mite loads were well under threshold. I also treated with oxalic acid in the fall without testing, and all the colonies survived. Is this a bad habit?
I mean, it sounds like you're managing mite, so we like to hear that. In general, I think you're going to have more information and sometimes make better decisions or understand your colonies better if you do some monitoring. So sometimes we have these trends that we expect. We expect our mite levels to be really low in the spring, but sometimes colonies surprise us and come through winter with a surprisingly high number of mites. And that's something that I want to know about, because those colonies might need more management throughout the season or earlier management in the season. Same thing. It's really common for us within an apiary to have a lot of colonies with pretty low mites and then 1 or 2 with surprisingly high mites. And so it's nice to know which colony that has higher mites. And also the treatments that we use normally are going to have some variability. So sometimes they're much more effective than others. So you might do a treatment and find that what you did wasn't as effective as last year when you did it. So just because it worked last year doesn't mean it's necessarily enough to work this year. In general, sometimes beekeepers get to a point where they're pretty good at understanding mite dynamics and their bee yards. We do want you to be managing, but I think you're going to make better decisions if you're monitoring and you have some of that information.
But I do think there is, it definitely helps for making better decisions. I think whether or not it's bad to be managing, even if you're not monitoring, I would say that it is not bad, and it's actually much better than doing the alternative, which is not managing at all. One of the things about the tests is that they were really, really useful back when the thresholds were much higher. So when we used to be able to handle like 10% mites, which is what some of the old publications say back before the viruses got bad, those tests were really useful. Now that we're talking about 1 and 2%, the tests aren't quite as useful as a diagnostic tool where you say, I'm going to wait until this hive gets really high and then I'm going to manage it. If you do that now, it's just too late. But as Anna mentioned, the testing is really way more important to find those ones where your management strategy isn't sufficient. All right. So there is another varroa question, and I don't know if you want to take this one too, is how you would treat bees for mites with horizontally designed hives.
Yeah, I think that's really tricky. Most of our mite treatments are developed for the Langstroth style hives. I would recommend kind of figuring out which ones you would want to use and then contacting the manufacturers and seeing if they have recommendations for using their product in your style hive.
And I think, yeah, I agree. Because we do rely on the Formic Pro a lot, and that one's definitely designed for the Langstroth because it's a fumigant. I think looking into the ones that are contact based, so like HopGuard, if you're with the honey flow is on, and then ApiGuard when you've already pulled the honey you want for humans, because those don't involve like fumigating, they involve the bees actually touching them and figuring it out. And Apivar if you want to use synthetics. And then the other thing that works for everything is breaks in the brood cycle. You can always requeen. All right. We got lots of swarming and split stuffs. All right, I'll go, Dan. I have 2 hives that were started from nucs this season. Both have larvae, but one is going gangbusters and the other is plodding along. I'm not sure what to do to increase production in the slower hive. Do I combine the hives now? And if so, what is the best way to do that?
It feels a little early to be combining stragglers at this point. I mean, we've still got a couple months left in bee season. So sorry, I'm trying to read this question again. I need to find it. I mean, one option is if you've got a struggling hive, I guess it's trying to diagnose why that hive is struggling is going to be your first, like, is it, is there a disease parasite issue like that? What does the brood look like? Are you seeing signs of brood disease or mite damage, or maybe the queen is not good quality, she's not doing it. So I guess my first thought would be before you start trying to to have a better path forward. As far as what to do with the straggler in mid-June, though, I guess I would be hesitant to take from a good, strong colony, because if that's producing and that's kind of rolling along, I wouldn't want to disrupt that too much.
I do think there's a lot of value in the fact that there isn't a straight answer.
Yeah, I don't think you're going to when you say to get it back on, like something about more getting production, a colony that's not a strong colony by mid-June, you're not really going to build it into something that is going to produce a lot of honey this year. So that's why I would hesitate to take from a colony that's on track. I mean, Megan talked about maybe if this colony's healthy and it's just smaller, maybe it's one of the population is down, but maybe it can be one of those late season splits where you say like, well, you're not going to make a lot of honey, but if you can, if I can turn you into 2 colonies, that could be an option. So it's kind of a matter of how far behind it is and what the lack of production is.
And I think also if one of them is going huge, like that's going to be your bigger concern for varroa. The other one might just be fine. It might not just be amazing. It might just be fine. And so it might not even be a problem. You just have 2 different, you have one huge producer and one that's okay. So I wouldn't worry about the fact that they're different. I'd worry more about if there's an issue with the little one, like Dan said, like if there's a disease. All right. My bees came out of winter extremely strong. I split them with the queen and transferred and made 5-frame nukes, but many of them swarmed anyway. I left behind in the parent colony the queen swarm cells, and there are about a dozen or more in each. I could have made 5 nukes out of each hive. They were so strong and so many queen cells, but I didn't have that much equipment. Been there. So should I have destroyed some of the queen cells to minimize the chance of secondary or tertiary swarms? Because that seemed to have occurred. I'm going to take this one because this is one of my favorite topics, but everyone can chime in too. So there are other aspects that drive the drive to swarm, really, which isn't necessarily just having the queen cells, but the queen cells are kind of a symptom of the fact that the colony is feeling crowded already. So when you're at the point that you're already seeing queen cells, those bees have been feeling the urge to swarm for at least a week. And so if you just make the splits, but you don't alleviate that feeling of crowdedness, they're just going to keep swarming. The most important thing that you can do is make sure that the queen, when she's in there, so if you can do swarm management like your splits before you see the queen cells, that's ideal. And I know we talk about this a lot in our earlier, like our May webinars and probably I think the April one this year. And so if you can do the management before you see the cells, that's ideal. And then always making sure that there is drawn comb for the queen to lay or for the bees so they have space to keep that brood nest open. As long as there is nectar in the brood nest, meaning that the bees don't have space to put the nectar, you're going to keep getting swarms. So even if you break it down a lot, they can still swarm if everybody is still feeling crowded. But you don't necessarily have to break everything down into, 5 different ones and use every queen cell. You just have to make sure that whatever splits you make have appropriate room to grow. And I think a lot of times people get caught off guard by how quickly they grow. I don't know if anyone wants to add to that. It looks like, does Reno want to add to that? Is that the all right. Zachary, here's one for you. If a beekeeper was to consider starting to use hive sensors for temperature monitoring and scales for weight monitoring, what should they install first, temperature or weight? Also, should they use the data, and do you know if there's any software that could be helpful?
I use Solution B that comes with an app. It has Bluetooth, so I bring my cell phone. I can actually stand like 20 feet away and still connect, but usually stand right next to the hive, and then it's going to connect the data, and then I can use data on my cell phone graphically or look at the raw data, like the next 3 days, how good is the honey, the nectar, incoming nectar. Yeah. It's interesting to see, even if they're getting 7 pounds a day, half of that is water. So next morning it drops and then it starts again. You have this, so it has this wavy pattern. It's drying, both the drying and also the consumption. So it's losing weight at night. And then during the day it will gain. So, but it will be relatively flat or even going downhill. That's when you know there's a dearth. Nothing is not coming, not enough is coming in to compensate the loss every night. And that's what you need to worry about. That goes on too long. Then you have robin and stuff. But in Michigan anyway, based on my experience, honey flow pretty much stops around end of July or middle August, depends on the rain. Like a Dutch white clover, white, is it Dutch white or white Dutch? I think it's Dutch white clover. What would continue to do well if it does enough rain, but if sometimes it shuts off and won't bloom again if it's has a drought for 2 weeks with no rain. So yeah, so I would say it depends on what you want. The temperature sensor is not very useful to me. It's because the hive inside the hive in the summer it's always going to be 95, and they only would tell you something big is happening when there's no queen. They stop raising brood, and the temperature drop to 75 instead of 95 when there's no brood. So wet game, it's kind of interesting to look at it, especially if you're new in the area, to get a hang of what is flowing, and combined with plants, you observe while the flowers blooming, and then you can tell, okay, black locust is very important in my area because the weight game is really taking off when that started blooming. And some people, if they have a good nose, they can smell the floral odor, especially at night. In the evening, you walk near your yard, you can smell, because bees are busy drying that nectar off, and a lot of floral odor comes off based on what flowers they have foraged during the day. So yeah, I would recommend the weight, but it's kind of expensive. So uh, be prepared. There are two types. There's also, I think, brood. I don't know what's it called. The guy who sells brood minder, which is a temperature sensor. They also have scales, which is which you have to support the hive with another stick, a wooden stick. So it weighs half of your hive. So that's considerably cheaper than solution B. Mine costs $550, but they said there's newer ones coming out cheaper, like $300. That's actually better quality. So there are a couple of different brands for hive scales. So do a little bit of research to see which one is more popular and the pros and cons of each one. So to me, solution B it's probably reliable, but still out of 20, I would have 1 or 2 go out of commission each season. I would have to take them apart and see. Most of the time, it's just the membrane switch going bad. Occasionally, the battery, which is supposed to last 5 or 10 years, battery would go bad because I got them used. So those are the 2 things I found. And some others I couldn't really fix when I just give me an error, communication error. So the battery is fine, it turns on fine, and something else is wrong with the main board. So then I give up.
Oh. Anna, I made splits on May 6th. One of the splits did not have any brood by June 6th, which I do like that this person waited the whole month. There was a capped queen cell. I checked again yesterday and there's still a capped queen cell. And now there's over 12 drone cells. No worker cells, probably laying workers. Recommendations for paper combine, shake the bees off, non-laying workers. If the shake method, how far to shake away from other hives?
Sure. Yeah, so I do sometimes see when a colony is queenless, like the fake little queen cells, then you poke, if I like open them up, there's like a little dark drone larva in there or dried up larva. So sometimes we see what look like the bees are trying to build queen cells when they don't have a young female larva to build it with. So I would guess that yes, this one sounds like it is queenless. If you are going to try to, so 2 options for combining. One is that I like. One is the newspaper combination. So I take my queen right colonies, put a single sheet of newspaper on top of the brood nest, and then put a box from the other hive, a queenless hive, on top. And I can kind of spread them out. Did you have something to add, Megan? You look like you're going to say something. Okay, so this time of year, if we are doing newspaper combinations, you definitely want to make sure that the top box has a little bit of an entrance because it's so hot. So you can even just prop that lid up there. And sometimes I'll even spread out the queenless hives between multiple. I'll do multiple combinations on top of queen right colonies. For shaking out in the yard, we do that too sometimes. And that's, I like to do it close to the other colonies in the yard just so that the bees can easily walk back into a hive. So we just shake bees off of the frames in the bee yard next to queen right hive so bees have a place to go into, and then stack that equipment on other hives.
Excellent. All right, and then this one's really related if you want to keep going. After a failed split on May 5th, the hive was introduced to a new mated queen on June 8th, and there was no laying worker brood. It has been 1 week, and the newly mated queen is alive, but there's no evidence of new fresh brood. What to do? A, give her more time, or B, add an open brood frame, or C, other.
So I'll be curious to hear what other people think here. One thought is it's easy when a queen starts laying to sometimes miss that patch of eggs, right? So go back and check, look in multiple parts of the hive, see if there is any eggs or young brood, because maybe you were just missing it at first. I have seen situations where queens are laying eggs and the eggs just aren't viable or surviving. That's not something I've seen very commonly, though. What do other people think?
For my opinion, like sometimes there's no exactly right answer because the situation is so weird, and I wouldn't have done the step ahead of time. So it's not necessarily you're doing anything wrong, but sometimes when there's not necessarily like a best management practice. So in general, if you have a failed split, usually that they didn't requeen, I don't tend to try to requeen those. I will just recombine that, excuse me, and make a proper split. So one of the situations, if the split is failed, which presumably means like they didn't requeen properly, at that point, you're not going to have young bees and kind of all of the demographics will be messed up. So if it doesn't get queen right or if it turns to laying worker, I just combine them, move on with life. And then if I want to have another colony, I will do a proper split again. So, and this is not to say that what you did was wrong, but it's just a different way of thinking of it. Sometimes when people make a split, they feel like they have to save it because they've already made it. But sometimes you're making it just to prevent swarming. You prevent swarming, it doesn't quit queen right, you can just combine it. Or what I'll tend to do is just combine it with a nuke. Excuse me, because I happen to have nukes on hand. You could just put a frame of, I would just put a frame of capped brood in there and just see what happens. And if she, because like one that's just about to emerge, and just see if she lays in there, because that'll increase her chances the best. And if she doesn't do it, then I would use her for dissection and education purposes and just combine it with a nuke.
But did you say how long was she made it? Only a week ago? Or
He
the two-
installed a queen that had been newly mated, so he introduced one on June 8th. So it's been like 11 days.
Okay. And that was the queen was mated when she installed it. Yeah, that's a bit too long. Usually I expect if it's already mated queen, it should be 3 days. They
Yeah.
started laying. That means 4 days later, you should see larva. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
All right. So Dan, you mentioned that bees typically won't produce wax or comb this late in the season, but I have no drawn comb to give them to fill with nectar. I have no choice to give them foundation to build comb for honey storage, right?
Pretty much, yeah. If you don't have it, you don't have it. There is some, I forget what it's called, but there is pre-drawn comb, but it's pretty expensive. I don't have first-hand experience with it, so I can't really recommend it if you've got nothing but foundation. And if it's a first-year colony where you're, you're not intending to harvest honey, be paying attention to the nectar flows, and if it's not coming in, you can provide feed if you need to. If it's they've got to fill out their skeleton, so to speak, by drawing wax if it's a new colony and that's all you've got. So trying to give them every chance you can to make wax. It's not that they won't make it at this time of year. It's just they don't make it as readily as they do a month ago.
So on that note, someone said they just installed a nuke into a single deep with 5 frames of foundation. Would you recommend feeding 1-to-1 to encourage comb building even if there's a flow on?
I probably would. I'm not a master botanist, and I get head scratching about the flow when it is and isn't. And I fed bees in June this year that I've never done that in as many years as I've been in Michigan. Because you're starting a nuke this late in the season as well, and if like you really do need to get them at least drawn out a single. Worst case, you give them syrup and they don't take it, and you're out of a few dollars in sugar. But the alternative is you don't feed them and they need it, and now you've got a colony that's really going to struggle to get to wintering size.
Yeah, and one thing about there being a flow on is you have to have the bees to actually go get it. So if you've got a little tiny nuke, whatever bees are in there are all going to be involved in nursing care, and you just don't have the foragers to go get it. Going back to your newspaper combine, Anna, so if you were doing a newspaper combine of the laying worker hive with several stronger colonies in just one hive, if you can explain that. And then also someone was talking about if you're combining a queenless hive with a nuke, is there anything special that you can do? So maybe just a little more on, how you make the decisions for a newspaper combine.
Sure. Yeah. So great questions. And one thing I guess Dan and I don't really talk about a lot, but one thing we do in our own beekeeping operation is when we make splits in the spring, we normally intentionally have some single deeps that we manage. And sometimes single deep colony management can be a little bit more trickier. But the thing that's really nice about it is that when we have these queen issues and we want to combine colonies, we'll just take a box from the laying workers, put it on a single deep that's queen right, and now we have a 2 deep colony with its honey supers on. So my point, I guess, when I was trying to explain that if you have a laying worker hive or a queenless hive that needs to be combined, that's a couple deeps, you can put those boxes on different queen right colonies. For me, that's more just because I don't like to have huge towers of brood boxes. So just trying to keep hives at manageable heights, and then also keep them producing honey and not giving them 5 brood boxes to fill up with honey with supers on top. So kind of you have some options. If you want to just do a 1-to-1, say you have a colony that's queen right and 2 deeps and a laying worker hive or queenless hive and 2 deeps, you can do newspaper combine and just put 2 queenless boxes on top of 2 queen right boxes. That's an option. Or you can split up the queenless boxes and put one on a queen right colony and one on another queen right colony. Both options are normally fine. It's more just preference. And part of it probably is how tall you are and how easy it is to reach boxes high up in the hive. As far as the nuke thing goes, so the question was just combining nukes, queen right nukes with queenless hives. Is that correct? So I think that that's pretty similar. So you could just, if you have a laying worker or queenless hive, put a sheet of newspaper on, put your queen right nuke on top. The main consideration is nukes are normally 5 frames. If we hit a good nectar flow and bees start drawing out more comb, you definitely want to fill out that box with frames or at least foundation, so you're not just leaving extra space in the top there. But that's a perfectly fine way to do a combination as well.
Yes. So there's lots of ways to do it. And I can say, like, I've done it because I raise queens and have like lots of mating nukes. I've done many situations where they go laying worker and the newspaper combination works all of the time. Okay, so someone nuked a queen in May to keep the hive from swarming and let the main hive requeen itself. I found the new queen and she fainted when I marked her. That happens. I put her back into the hive. I saw her breathing. 8 days later, I checked her hive, saw eggs, found the marked queen alive and well, but also saw queen cells. Any suggestions? I decided to let nature take its course. Dan, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, it's kind of one of those, there's no wrong answer. Like if she's laying well, like if she's a new queen, she's laying well. Typically I'll cut those queen cells out the first time, but if I come back on the next inspection 10 days later and they've rebuilt queen cells, I'll say they're going to do it one way or another, so let them get on with it, let nature run its course at that point. Sometimes bees chew down queen cells I know that's a thing, but I'm in the like new queen. Are they going to? So I usually go through and cut them out. But again, if they repeat it and I say it's a case where they know better than I do. So I let them go with it.
Mhm. All right. When I checked my new queen to make sure she was released from her cage, the bees hadn't fully eaten through the candy and her attendants had died. I pulled the cork out at the other end and the queen came out and flew away. Is this an unusual risk? So I'll speak to my experience, and then if someone else wants to, I have had queens worth hundreds of dollars fly away on me before. It is when they're caged for so long, especially if you're trying to do a candy release and she's in there for a while. She hasn't been laying, so she is able to fly. Generally, if you stand still and just wait, she comes back. So you just have to be chill about it and you just have to look for her, and usually she'll like land on the hive or she'll land on you, or you'll find a little ball of bees on the ground. Um, that has thankfully happened most of the time when I have very expensive queens. Some of the time it doesn't. And it's usually because you move away. But when she flies away, she does take like a visual image of trying to come back. In the future, I don't tend to use candy introductions because the speed that they eat through the candy has nothing to do with the speed that they like her. It has to do with how the candy is. And so sometimes they eat through the candy too fast and they release her and then they are hard on her. Or sometimes they really like her, but the candy's too hard and they can't. So I always do direct releases. Or if it's an expensive queen, I really try to use the push-in cages. That's my favorite introduction. Dan or Anna, I don't know if you want to add or if you want to commiserate too.
No, I definitely had them fly away, feel stupid every time. But like you said, more often than not, you just, yep, give them a chance to come back and then, check it out in a few days. One thing that can be a little preventative with that is because I did a lot of pushing cages this year, is misting them with a little bit of water. Or a little bit of sugar water in a spray bottle, like before, either if you're going to release them for a cage. In my case, I was getting them from a little candy cage into a push-in cage, or just when I was opening the hive and pulling the push-in cage out to release her into the hive. I gave her a little bit because I didn't want them to fly away, and that works fairly well. If there's a little moisture on their wings, they're not going to fly, and the bees will pay attention and kind of groom them pretty quickly.
The hillbilly version of that is you just spit on her when she's in the cage. That was how I learned. That's not the official MSU recommendation to spit on your queens. So the last question I've been holding because it's near and dear to my heart, and I'm going to try to not give it the hour-long version. But we are working on guidelines that should hopefully, or I'm going to hopefully have more time to work on this winter. And the question is EFB best practices. So best practices for dealing with EFB. The reason that we don't have a short answer is because there's not the perfect solution. We do have a webinar that we did explicitly on European fallbrood and what we know about the science. One of the papers that came out recently since that webinar is on the prevalence, which from the USDA, which matches our own research, is that it isn't about the bacteria that causes it is about 20% of colonies. So it's a really, really, really high prevalence. And the reason I'm bringing that up is because if you don't want to do anything really incredibly dramatic, because you maybe aren't going to have a chance to eradicate it. So with American fall brood, we can burn the colony or we can euthanize the bees and then burn the equipment, because there's a chance that if you deal really aggressively with it, you'll eradicate it. If you're still purchasing bees, so let's say you don't have your mite management down and you're bringing in nucs and you're bringing in packages, because it's in so many colonies, there's a very high chance that you could bring it in. So you don't want to burn all of your equipment and then have to get rid of it. and then or you burn all your equipment and then just have it come in. So you have a couple options. So one is you can take it dramatically and you can do either a shook swarm where you shake the bees onto new foundation and burn the equipment. That would only be a recommendation if you are in a place where you really think you can eradicate it. So if you're very far removed and you've got a closed apiary. Your second option is to use antibiotics, in which case you're working with a veterinarian and you're not doing it when you have honey flow going. Your third option is watchful waiting. So at this time of year, a lot of times it does go away. That being said, it will go away from you kind of don't see the symptoms, but you generally do have the bacteria in your operation. So it will be something you'll have to deal with year from year. And then your other option is to do a shook swarm where you take the bees and you put them onto new equipment. And that's something that we are working on this year of trying to see how well that works. Both, doing just the ones that have signs of disease and then the ones, everything in the yard. I would say one last point with the European fall brood is that when you see signs of disease in one colony, you generally will have the bacteria in all of the hives in the yard. So whatever you're doing, you kind of want to treat it at the yard level. So I know that was probably the most depressing question to end on. It's my favorite because I love studying honeybee bacterial diseases. But I don't see any more questions. So thanks everyone for your attention and for all of the great questions and for spending your time learning about bees with us.
Thank you. Have a great night.